Hi, we're with Erez Reznikov, one of the biggest experts to Figma I know. And whenever I need to recap on stuff about Figma, I always turn to Erez.
Hi, Ram. All of these tips are basically, earned with sweat, blood, and cursing in the air, not knowing it in advance. So yeah, so you guys can learn from our experience and not have to sweat it all out yourself. So this is the motivation behind this video.
Okay, so without further ado, I think we want to share screen, right? So I'm going to share
Sure,
my screen.
sure.
And okay, so here we go. 7 tips starting with Figma. Okay, so the first tip. Before you start with Figma, you need to understand the pricing model and how much do they charge. That was a very painful lesson we learned by paying a lot of money to Figma after a while. So let's have a look at the pricing model as a start. And what you can see there are like three basic. It's really straightforward. You can have the free, which will ex expire itself really quickly because of the project limitation. You can handle up to editors and the 30-day version history, that's okay. But once you actually work with the tool, you probably need to more than 3 projects and you move to the professional. And the professional is pretty decent, like $12 for an editor. However, one thing you have to notice is when you share a, a Figma project with another editor, and that editor is not a paid user, then you're charged for that editor. So you really, really need to notice this when you're going into Figma and you're sharing sharing this, and you give somebody the option to edit, then we are in a position where we pay for that user. You can have everybody go inside and view, but this is a payment and it will not stop until you stop and make it a view only share. So that's my first thing. Understand your billing, check it out, because Figma is really great about it. Actually, when we talked to them, they actually gave us some of our money back. But it's not really nice to look at that invoice and say, oh, what happened here? Why am I paying so much? Next tip. Erez.
Yes, I'll share my screen. By the way, a question regarding the pricing model. Is it also still true? I don't know if they changed it or not, but I know there was a lot of backlash regarding the fact that if you share it with another editor and that editor starts to share it with other people who are editors, because the moment he's an editor, he can start doing things. So even if he knew that editing is costly, he could be completely oblivious about who's paying the bills because he was not going to be the person getting the bills, so we could just
Yeah, that,
completely
that's
spread
that.
it around.
Yeah, that's definitely a risk. I think that this is still plausible. And again, you need to look at your invoice, and
Yeah.
I think it's part of the sharing approach of Figma, which is a good thing. But you need to mind,
Yeah.
what your billing is. So going into Figma, understand your billing, understand who you're sharing with, and what are you giving them, and keep a note. So sometimes we work with clients and we share our stuff with them, and we let them to edit, but then we put a note that we need to close that option
Right.
for editing and give them the view. Most of our clients don't need the editing. They just need to look at our design, work with them. Same applies for your programmers if you're working in-house. Really few people need editing, and not all the time.
Right.
Sometimes we give marketing the ability to edit our stuff, to put text there, but that's like for a very limited time.
Sure.
Yeah,
So
sure.
basically, the main problem is that everyone can be sharing the file, but not everybody is sharing the bill. if
Right.
if every editor would share the price, would share the bill, that would make it so much easier. But no. It's the owner who
Yeah.
is paying the whole price. Okay, so
Tell
I'll
me
share
about
my,
it.
so I'll share my, you need to allow me to share
Yeah, I'll
screen.
let you share. Just one sec. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah, so what I wanted to show you and talk to you about is something that I've encountered numerous times in our Israeli Facebook group or other groups of I've seen this issue arise. Is the people don't quite understand the copy logic of Figma, and they think it's like sporadic or random, or they just cannot assign any profound logical consistency to how it works. So let me explain how it works. So from now on, you won't be bamboozled by it, but rather in advance know exactly what's going to happen. So let's assume that we have a frame, right? And we want to have another frame, and maybe larger, okay? And we're going to have a couple of objects. So we're going to have like a rectangle and maybe a rectangle with some round corners and maybe an ellipse. Okay. Let's paint them in different colors so it's easier to identify. Okay. Now, what I wanted to show you that is that if I'm in a frame, okay, and I'm copying, okay, Command C or Control C, whether you're in PC or Mac, and I'm going to another frame and hitting Command or Control V, I'm gonna get the following logic. The object is going to go to its parent frame, okay, and ask this parent frame, how far am I to the top and the left of the frame? Okay, so you see those two sort of dotted lines here. This will indicate two things. One of the indication is the constraint, okay, and the other is basically saying the x and the y measurements. Now because our constraint is left and top, so it's going to be both of them indicate the same thing. If I'll change my constraint to right and top, okay, now it will say so from right and from top, this is the distance. But still, what's interesting, so if I copy and paste it again, it pastes in the same place. So it will not respect the constraint I'm having on the frame. It will always, always, always disregard the constraint and use only the top and the left, because X and Y in Figma work in such a way that the absolute zero of measurement is the top left corner of a frame. So that's 0, 0. So if you think about, calculus and trigonometry and geometry in your math classes, then you'll remember that you'll have 4 quadrants, right? So this is a 0, 0, and everything Figma treats, okay, is like the second quadrant, okay? So it goes down with the values of y, and it goes right with the values of x. Okay, so this is the 0, 0. And that means that if we read, okay, let's have the constraint back to left. So if we read the x and y measurements, it's going to say it's 539 pixels to the left. Okay, so that's the measurement of the x, and it's 261 from the y. Okay, so, and if you copy and paste, never mind the size and the position of the other frame you just pasted it to. Okay, let's do it again with this one. It's gonna paste it in the exact same positioning in regarding to the 0, 0 point, the left top point. So this is how framing copy and paste works. Now, suppose I grouped all of these 3 objects, okay? So Command or Control G. And now I would do sort of the same thing. I will go and copy this object, which is now in a group. And then I go here to a frame, okay, and do paste. Now this usually confuses the heck out of people, okay, and pisses them off usually because this is unpredictable. Why would it do such a thing? And the reason is that if Figma sees that you copied something from a group is not a real object in Figma. So a frame is a real object, and a group is just a collection of its objects. How do we know this? Frame is independent in its in its size, okay, of its content. Okay, so I can make the frame larger or smaller. It wouldn't affect the content. Group, you cannot do anything to a group which is not the exact measurements of the bounding box of all of its content. Okay, so group is not a real thing. It's sort of a helping mechanism to bind objects together so that it's easier to manipulate them, you know, drag them around, do some other manipulations on them, resize them, stuff like that, okay? But group is not a real object. Now, because it's not a real object, it doesn't have this property like the frame have to have the 0, 0 starting point. So when I copy from a group, from inside a group, Figma doesn't know the coordinates. And if Figma doesn't know the coordinates, what it's gonna do is just paste it dead in the center of whatever frame, okay, or group I'm pasting it into, okay? So if for some reason you copy something from the exact location, so suppose I didn't know, or I missed the fact that I have a group here. I just command and clicked the object itself, which means that I avoided being trapped by the group, right? Or I just double clicked into it, which will basically do the same thing. Okay, and I missed the fact that there's a group at the beginning of the frame. Okay, and I will copy, and I would assume it would be pasted in the same place, but instead it will be pasted dead in the center. Okay, so if you have that, remember to check maybe you've copied something from a group. Okay,
That could be totally confusing. And for the like the first year I used Figma, I still am confused for that because you never know how
right,
much group you are.
right.
Is there any way to work around this?
Yeah, so one other reason it's confusing is that in other kinds of software canvases that people worked on before Figma, which is Illustrator, maybe Sketch, XD, things work differently. So there, if you copy something and then you paste it in front or paste it in place or pasted it in some way that will honor the same positioning from the frame and disregard the group. So in Sketch, it would work the same thing. In Illustrator, it would work in the same way, and it would disregard grouping completely. But Figma does not allow for that to happen. Figma honors the hierarchical positioning of every element, and it always asks. So basically, the algorithm you should have in your mind is when you copy something, always ask who's the parent. Okay, so if a parent is a group, then the pasting is going to be dead in the center of whatever place you're going to paste it. And if a parent is a frame, then it's going to be towards that frame. By the way, so sometimes you could have, a real life example would be probably a frame, and inside of it, a frame, and inside of it, a couple other different levels of framing, and only eventually the objects themselves. So when copying this object right now, it will not use the largest frame. It will always go only to the nearest parental frame it sees, right? And use those coordinates as the coordinates to paste in a new direction, okay, in a new frame.
So if you have a duplicate frame, so if you have like the same kind of layout and you want to keep that position, just mind which frame is selected when you paste.
Exactly. So for example, if I'm if this frame gonna have a color, let's do something white. Okay, and okay, so if I'll do copy from here and paste to here, I'm gonna have something weird. Okay,
great.
But if I'm gonna do a copy from here and then select that frame and do paste, I will have it exactly in the same position. Okay.
Right.
So
right.
that's important to remember. So that
super
was
helpful.
So that was everything regarding the copy logic and how it works differently between groups and frames. The next thing I wanted to explain to you guys is constraints generally. Scale is one of the options to choose or not to choose from the drop down of constraint. and how to ignore constraints, because this is also something that when people are discovered, they're like, why didn't I know it, like, a month's back time. So so let's explore constraints for a second. So constraints are
I,
only
just
relevant.
one word about it. So
Yeah,
just
sure.
note when you start Figma, at the fact that constraint can cause you a lot of frustration because you move stuff, you scale stuff, and it acts not always as you expect it if you not understand that. So if I would be starting Figma now, I'd be carefully listening. I wish I had this conversation with you a few months ago when I was banging my head on a few layouts. So yeah.
So and by the way, it only gets more complicated. We'll inspect this later on in this webinar regarding auto layout. But auto layout just made the constraints um, even more non-trivial. Let's put it this way. Okay. So let's explore constraints. So as I've said, constraints make only sense for frames or derivative of frames. So what are derivative of frames? Components or components from a library from another file. Okay, because basically a component is just a frame with some extra powers. Okay, it always is a frame. But it doesn't work for groups. So if I'll just have a couple of elements here and I'll group them, you'll see that when I touch a specific element, it does not have constraints. Because once again, group is not a real thing. Okay, it's just grouping of objects, but it's not a thing, it's not an object. So there's nothing towards what to be constrained. Okay.
Yeah.
Frame on the other
You may
hand,
look at frame as your anchors in your entire thing. So always mind the frame, what you're framing, because these are your layout anchors. You need to think of them as an object, right?
right.
That grouping is just, it just helps you to manipulate, like take things together.
Exactly. So grouping is instrumental and frames are fundamental. Okay,
Yeah.
I would put it this way. So so I have a frame and I have an object inside of it, and maybe I'll have another object as well. Let's color it differently. Each and every object by default, if you didn't change any defaults, will have a constraint of left and top towards the frame, as we've said. But I can change that. I can make it right, and I can make it bottom. Now, so this will go right and bottom, which means that it's constrained to the same distance from the right and from the bottom, okay, towards the frame. So if the frame's gonna expand or contract, okay, so because I was constrained, so see that there's always the same distance from the right and the bottom, disregarding the size of the frame itself or the positioning of the frame itself, okay? And this goes left and top. Now, so what kind of constraints do we have? So we have on the horizontal scale, we have left and right, center and scale. So left and right are pretty clear. Left and right means that the object itself will stay, so its left ridge, it's going to be the same distance from the left ridge of the frame. His right ridge is going to be the same distance from the right ridge of the frame. So what's going to happen to the object itself when I expand the frame? Well, the object is going to expand as well, okay? So sometimes is a very much desirable effect, and sometimes is a very much not desirable effect. Depends on what you need. So just so you know what left and right does. Next thing on the menu is center. So center is going to say something like that. Calculate how this object is in comparison in relation to all of the frame. And when the frame gets bigger, make the centers of the object. So for example, the object does not have to be in the center for center to work, right? So what does it do? It tells Figma to take the object in its center and the frame in its center. And when the frame gets bigger, the relationship remains the same. Okay, so if we have like, I don't know, 1/8 or 1/7 difference, it's going to be remain 1/8 or 1/7 difference when I enlarge or contract my object. But the good thing about it is that never mind how big or small I'm gonna enlarge or contract my frame, the object that I've said center about is always going to respect pixel perfection. So if the object itself is in full pixels, it's always gonna start and end on a full pixel. Okay, that's a very important thing to remember now that we're going to talk about scale. Okay, now
Yeah. Well, just
scale.
one point I want to make on this. Why is that so important? And the entire thing about constraint is, especially when you work with digital stuff that you need to move into development, then understanding constraint is a way to communicate how you want to be your designs to behave down the line when they're programmed. It tells a big story to the programmers, and also let you examine on that, because a lot of our frustration comes from putting a great design in front of our face, moving it to different screen sizes, and scream, right? Oh no, what have you done? But you never communicated that to the developer. It's really, really difficult to understand. And sometimes we just don't think about it, because you can put that kind of center, and if you shrink that, you would see that this object cannot do that in small like width of the frame. It just will go out of bounds.
Exactly.
And as a designer, this actually gives you a head start on the conversation you're going to have with the developer. So when you're in concept, well, okay, don't mind that so much. But when you're in UI design, where you go into the details, constraint has a lot of importance in the way you communicate with the developers. So starting Figma, I think that's one of the features that really stands out for me. And it looks a little technical, but as a designer, what you need to do is to play with it. It's so playful. Just change the properties, see how it behaves, and understand what happens when screen changes. You need to understand that in your design.
Right.
Sorry, I barged in.
Right. So yeah, no, that's very valid point. So basically, you earn three things by using constraints properly as a designer. So the first thing you win is that you can ease the pain when you need to change stuff yourself. So even if you'd, for example, work by yourself, like if there was no developing done, or if the developing will be done by yourself even, so even in that case, even in that remote, you still win by properly using constraints, because if you need to change something, so something got erased, other things need to take its place, right? And if those things are complicated and have stuff inside of it, like frame inside of frame inside of frame, then you would benefit a lot of setting all the constraints properly, because you just would save yourself just a ton of time, not having to manipulate by hand whatever it is that got changed. So even if you're working by yourself egoistically, right, you would still win. And of course, that's on top of easier communication for developers, and a more thorough, lifelike, real exploration that you can do with constraints. So you don't need to wait for someone to enlarge or contract your phone or tablet size or desktop size. You can do it by yourself and immediately feel, oh, wait, so it maybe will work for this size, but it wouldn't work for this size. I need to think of another rule, because constraints are just basically rules, same way that you will have rules in CSS.
Right.
But anyways, let's continue to the explanation about scale and constraints. So we had left, and right, center, and the same way you're going to have vertically top, and bottom, center. So these are completely identical. And scale. So what will scale do? So scale will say the following rule. You have a proportion between the object and the frame. If the frame grows larger, okay, the object grows larger as well. So it's something like a mix between having center and having left and right. because it will think of the centers, and it will also think of the general width and height of a thing, of an object, and all in comparison to its frame. Now, why is that usually a bad thing to do? Reason is that when you enlarge your frame, from the bottom right corner, um, Figma makes it so, and this is very important that it does so, it makes it so that you always hit a full pixel on the X and the Y and the width and the height. Okay, so it doesn't, I don't need to be very careful here. It doesn't matter what I do, it will always land on a perfect pixel. Now, because I've made this with scale, and scale is a proportionate measurement, okay, proportionate rule. Now look what happened. So this object is now 6049.09 pixels times 235.27. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, usually this is a bad idea for you. Okay. So sometime it will be okay if you're like using, I don't know, Flexbox in CMS and CSS, and you divide, for example, something into 3/3, or you're using CSS grid and dividing something into 3/3, and those 3/3 could not compute perfectly. So in real life, they would be something of a fractured number, and you wouldn't even know it when you're doing CSS. But when you're in Figma and things need to map on and align to other things, the moment you go into fractures, everything kind of goes to hell, because then everything else will be fractured also, if it's going to have full. So if something ends with a fracture and then something is exactly 10 pixels from it, then this thing will now be fractured. Or it wouldn't allow you to make it non-fractured because trying to snap to perfect pixels, and this object remained perfect, right? So you could never align them in like exactly,
Yeah.
I don't know, 14 pixels, because one of them is a crooked object and one of them is a straight object. So
I
scale,
think that if you are all in vector shapes, then you're more or less okay. But once you go out of vector shapes, even that is risky. But and it
sure,
really depends on what's the implementation. But if you're out of it, and things can really get screwed up and it doesn't
right.
look real.
Right. So usually, so when do I see people use scale? So they usually use scale because they are not really sure how left and right and top and bottom works, but actually they wanted that. So there's only one real case in which you would want scale, okay, because nothing else will achieve that. And I will just show it, but usually people go and do, I don't know, a header or a footer or a sidebar, and instead of doing left and right, which is the proper way to go, okay, then everything is just 0 pixels from the right, 0 pixels from the left, but it always stays in proper pixel amounts and nothing is fractured. Same goes to height, right? So if you have a sidebar, you would probably want to go uh, top and bottom, and this is left and right. And in terms of scale, it's going to be top and left and right, and this is going to be left and top and bottom. And now, okay, I can do whatever I want, and all of these are going to be absolutely precise and do whatever, exactly what I intended them to do. And I don't need to use scale. The only reason to actually use scale is if you want a proportionate dissection of a space. Okay, so example would be if I want, I don't know, so if I want to like have it into thirds, right? So I'll have a third, and another, okay, maybe not a third. So let's explore different colors.
Yeah.
So suppose I want these three, okay, to have a certain relation and keep that relation, okay? In that case, doing left and right will not help me because they will just, overflow each other. That's not the desired,
Right.
it's not the desired thing for us when we want to keep the relation. So in that case, all of these are going to be in terms of the horizontal scale, and for example, bottom in the vertical. And now, whatever I
Yeah.
do, it actually works. Okay, it actually does what it intends to do.
Yeah.
But this is the only reason, and usually it's the best. So if you're probably doing it, you're not doing it with objects. You're probably doing it with frames. So
Right.
I'll probably want a couple of frames inside of that frame.
Yeah.
Okay, and I
So
can.
would you use it for like handling a grid responsive layout?
Well, yeah. If I need something that will respond as keeping the same proportion and still getting bigger and smaller, then in that
Yeah.
case, yes. Wait a minute. Let's do something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So if all of these three ones are scale and inside of them are objects, okay. So these are only frames. These are not objects now, right? So in here we can have something like that, okay, and let's just color them all in, I don't know, pitch
And
black.
that actually works because they are layout elements and not actually like content elements. So that
Exactly. So it will still have the same property problem. So the frame itself is going to be fractured same way as the rectangle is fractured. But at least, but usually, if, for example, if they don't have colors, if all of them are transparent, right? So if they're like that, then sometimes it's something you can live with. Okay, so if I want those three black rectangles to still have the same proportion towards one another when I'm enlarging and contracting it, so that's the way to do it. So this is probably going to be the only reason to ever use scale, but the majority of the misuse is instead of left and right and top and bottom. Okay, so I'll stop
great,
sharing.
great. Okay, so
Back to you.
now it's for me, right? Okay, so the next tip is a short one, I think, but I think it's really important, and we wasted a lot of time on it, is talking about install the missing fonts. This a lot of times you want to use non-system fonts or fonts that we will embed in our designs. Also we move them between Mac and PC where some system fonts are missing. And we need to be able to work with that file. And if you don't have that font, you'll get an alert from Figma. So there's a neat plugin you can work out in Figma that enables you to work with different like customized fonts. It's a bit hidden. Okay, so it's under your menu and under help and account, you'd go to open font settings. Okay, so I intentionally uninstalled my support here. And if you scroll down, you'd see this section. And there's a few ways you can get to the screen. This is just one of them. It's kind of confusing. That's where I get it. And you get this big button saying download installer to enable local fonts. And that will prompt you for a simple download so in Mac, I'll get a PKG, I'll run it, and you get an install running. Yeah. So that's a simple wizard. No need to overthink it. Yep. Yep. So the reason why Figma needs that is because fonts are system and they need access to these fonts locally. So that's kind of a bridge between your browser and your system. And once you have that installed, you can see that the fonts are enabled and you can go back into your design and use any font that is available on your system, on any text field that you're working on. Mind the fact that if you're sending your file or sharing it, the other person would have to install these fonts as well. So you may want to first buy a license if it's a licensed font, and then just send that font to him, make him install that font in her system, and then install the plugin. Once you do that, you don't need to worry about it anymore. But that's the tip. Okay, so past the fonts, which is a short tip, I'm going to give another a nice little tip. So one thing that really confuses a lot of people is when they share the design, and a lot of time people skip that in mind. So a very neat feature of Figma is the ability to present, to use a prototype, not sending the actual file, which requires people to be a little technical, and be able to share something like that, which enables you to move between different frames of your presentation. Now, in many cases, when we work on the big screens and we share them, you can see that we look at the design, it looks okay. The default, when we share it, is 100%. So this is actually pixel by pixel. It doesn't scale anything, it just sends it. And it looks okay on my screen because it's my screen is just the right size for this. But let's say my zoom, like I have like a bigger, a smaller resolution screen. This is what I get when I get your design. I'm just getting something that is not what you wanted. So in this case, well, it requires me to scroll, and I'm not sure this is what I meant. And in many cases, so for example, you have something at the bottom of the screen. If you have something on the bottom of the screen, you do want them to see it the first glance because that's a design, you want this. But if you were like sharing some kind of, for example, a website, and here, this is a website we've done, and this is fine. I'm looking at it, it looks okay. But mind you that when you share it, it may well be that this is what your partners will see. They'll see half of your design, and they wouldn't be able even to see these like scrolled parts. Or sometimes you think like, I want to have an impact. I want it to be a full scale. I don't want these because in the original design, I'm going to have this full. So Figma gracefully allows that and enables you, let me go back to the normal zoom levels, and that enables you to control some of it. So when you play a prototype, you get to the screen and you have these options when you roll over the top bar. And you have 4 options. So the first one is 100%, just so pixel by pixel. This is great. I'll help you when you want to see like designs that how they look pixel by pixel, how these images are going to look, and they're going to look exactly like that if they're like pixel scale. But another option is scale down to fit. So let's go to our example where we are like, I get this, and here I just made sure everything I sent will be here, will be in the screen. Maybe for this example, this will be the best fit. I just want to make sure everything I sent is readable, okay? But obviously, this is not a good way to look at a website you designed. So another option will be to scale down or up to fill. So that means that even if it's a small scale, I'm going to have the thing full, like this will be good. So it'll scale the maximum it can. So if that will be a little smaller, you'd see it scaling. But the last option will be scale down to fit width. And what's good about this is that when you send a website that has scroll, you know that you make sure that everything fits in the screen. I don't have this design outside of the screen. I can still scroll and see that. So it's not a full screen where everything is inside and I can't scroll, because I do want them to scroll. I do want them to understand exactly what I meant with my design. Now, an important point about this is before you send your prototype, notice that when I change the options of scaling, actually it changes the URL. It changes the ending of the URL to say which scale is it. So actually when I'm sharing, I have to mind that because the first impression you can get only once. So you'd wanna make sure your partners see your design the way you want it to be seen. And that's why you will select the right thing to fit. Here it's scale down fit. I can send this safely and know how the other party will get that design. Yup. So I'm done with the Zoom and we'll go back to number 6. I'm going to stop sharing and allow you to share, right?
Sure. Okay, we're back. Okay, so in this one, we're going to talk about components and the relation to design system. So if you remember, we've talked that frames are the one having constraints and other features of being in real object. So a component is a frame with even more options, right? Even more strength, even more power. Some people misuse, or should I say not use enough of components when they should have, and they don't always basically use wisely components as to manipulate them into being part of their design system. So what you would usually do is that your design, you're having your frame and you're having some objects and everything's beautiful and you have a piece of text, yada, 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 okay? You're done with everything. And some of the things, you know that you're gonna create a flow now. And I know that, for example, I'm always gonna have this particular menu sidebar, for example, and okay, sidebar. And I know that for every screen, it's going to be the exact same sidebar, even if other menu items inside of that sidebar are going to be selected. So one great way to not work hard but smart in Figma is to utilize the ability of components and then utilize the fact that you have components to ease up your design system, right? So you would, so for example, let's create a menu item, okay? Let's make it a little bit smaller, okay? And we're probably gonna wrap it up inside of a frame. Okay, so I did Alt Command G to wrap it up inside of a frame. Okay, so I'll probably want to have a menu item like that. And now I would wanna make it a component, right? And I would call it something like menu item / idle. Now, why /idle? /idle because I'm already in the beginning, okay? I already know, I can foresee the fact that I will have to build a design system for my, I don't know, website, application, you name it. And I would have to decide for all of the different states, every different interaction element is gonna have, right? So if it's a menu item, it's probably gonna have a couple of states. Idle, hover, if it's web, pressed, focused, disabled, whatever, right? Whatever it's necessary for your specific case. So, so what I'll do is I'll automatically create a menu item idle, and then I will duplicate it down, and I will think about what change I would want if it was the selected item, for example. So I would maybe want the background to be, I don't know, something else, okay? Or maybe something really else. So this is the selected one. So I'm gonna make this, so this is now a child of this component, right? So this is the main component and this is the instance. So I'll take that instance, I wrap it up inside of another component, and then call it menu item selected. Okay, so now I have basically menu item idle here. I have menu item selected here, both of them components, right? And then I will take the initial one, the menu item idle, to duplicate it once again, and maybe after that even once again. And I will have this one be, for example, my hover version. So I will say something like, okay, so it will have the same yellow, but maybe, I don't know, maybe not 100%, maybe like 30%, okay? And I will make that a component and call it menu item slash hover. And this one I would want to make a disabled version. So I'll maybe click the text itself and make it, I don't know, like 40% of its opacity and make it a component and call it menu item slash disable. Okay, because you cannot click this menu. So I already have the 4 menu items. All of them are components. 3 of them are basically a wrapped component of an instance of the first component, right? So now why is that comfortable? It's comfortable because I know that all of these 3s are a derivative of the initial one. So even in the initial one, I go and change the font size from 10 to 12, everything is gonna, and move it, for example, up a bit, then I would know that all of the other versions are gonna automatically adjust themselves. And that's a very powerful, way to have somewhat of a cascading control like in CSS, but without writing a line of code.
Yeah. How early on your designs do you start working with components?
The minute I sense that something that I'm working on is not a one-off spin. So if I'll have the vaguest sense that this is going to be copied and pasted and copied and pasted again. So everything that there's more than one screen is probably a component. Okay. Same way that I'm thinking that everything that a color will be used more than once is probably worth making it a style, a color style, and maybe a font, a text style that I think that this specific thing is going to be worth. So for example, by the way, let's take this real example. So I've created these 4 versions, states of the menu item. And then I remembered that the initial menu item here, okay, it's not a text style. And I would want to make it a text style. So I would create a text style and I would say, this is a menu item label. Okay. And now look, all of the states are got menu item label because they're all a derivative of the first one, right? So now what I'll do is that I will take these 4, okay, copy them on the spot, okay? And so I'll have instances of all of them, right? And I will take the components, the original ones, I'll cut them and I'll paste them here, for example, okay? Mm-hmm. And what's nice about it is, let's, make them roomy. And now I'm working, I'm not in the, so there's 2 modes when you're working, right? There's the exploratory and the explanatory mindset, right? So when you're exploring stuff, you don't want to be bogged down by documentation and by being too meticulous and too orderly. You want to embrace the chaos and quickly progress with your screens and ideas, right? You want to manipulate stuff on the spot.
Love that, embrace the chaos. That's embrace like my life motto.
Right. So I want you to understand that Figma helps you to embrace the chaos, but still help you remain orderly enough so that eventually when you'll have to stop with the chaos and start order, it's not too hard to do, right? So what I'll usually do is that I will leave those components on the side, floating in mid-space and on the canvas, right? But I know that everything that has something purple on it means that it's a real component. And I know that eventually I will create some page and I will call it design system, okay? And I know that eventually, I will go and take these, cut them, go into design system, and paste them in the proper location with the proper labeling of what exactly is it, how should it be used, yada, 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 okay? The proper documentation of the design system. So the way I would work is that, and now, by the way, so what's neat? Now I don't want both the hover, the disable, the idle, and the selected. I want everything to be idle except for one, right? So I will take the hover, and here I will, instead of hover, I will select idle. And same goes for here. And I will make a couple of other copies of it, right? Now, the neat thing is that I can now take all of it, all of the thing, okay, and make all of it into a component of itself, right? And call it a sidebar. And now, whatever I've designed here and, you know, started to make more and more copies of the same screen with all the changes in the content of the screen itself, the sidebar now is always the same. So if I want to change some decision making, for example, I want to make the sidebar slightly larger, it will of course affect all of the permutations of the instances immediately. And eventually I need to remember that this sidebar is also a component. So I'll probably immediately duplicate it, take the sidebar, put it into the canvas near me, and continue on my quest to work properly. And eventually I will just take all of the things that were scattered around my chaotic way of doing all of the screens, and I will take my time. I will know that now it's the state of me making order in the system, and I will take it, cut it, go into the design system, paste it in the right direction, and start documenting how it's going to work, and for the developers, how should they build it, yada, yada, yada. Okay.
So would you say that the moment you do the copy frame, that's the moment when you say, well, you pop the question, should I bother? And then if you say, yeah, I copied yeah, I should bother because it's going to save me some time.
Right.
So basically, yeah.
And usually people, they realize, so I had the same thing when I was just starting off at Figma. So I would usually break when I would get to my like 7th, 8th, 9th screen, and I would like, yeah, that's already too much. I'm gaining a problematic situation in which if I want to make some change, and this is not a component, I would have to copy and paste in all the screens. And eventually it's just daunting and stupid, right? So
yeah, so when you ask yourself, like, should I bother? Then ask yourself, what's the alternative? Exactly. Like in 5, 6 screen, the alternative will be that I'm constraining my design. And that's a bad thing, because I don't want to, any change would be like hell now. So yeah, that.
Exactly, and you don't want that to affect your decision making. So if you're too lazy as a designer and you say, yeah, man, changing it in 20 places, I probably will not change it. That's a mistake. Okay, that's a bad thing.
So if you're lazy, then you need to work with components.
Exactly. So and you shouldn't be afraid of the fact that components seem rigid, right? So here, this menu item is highlighted, but in another instance, I can, swap it around. I can make this one instead of this one and every other one. And if I even want to, I can even, shut the eye on some of them. And so the fact that this is an instance and I cannot do some orders of freedom, like moving stuff around, does not mean that I don't have enough orders of freedom for the instances to work properly, right? So it's still good. It's still good to use it than not to use it. And the last part is that, so regarding constraints and what was said before, I think we missed something important, that if we have some object and we have many objects, for example, and I want to do something that disregards them, okay? So if I'll enlarge or contract my my frame,
Right.
things would move, right? And suppose I want
Right.
to contract my frame without things moving. In that case, I can hit Command Mac or Control in PC and then drag. And this is a special mode in which Figma allows me to enlarge and contract my frame without regarding anything with the constraints of the object in it. Okay, so that's important.
This is like the $1,000 tip for me. Like that's like it saves so much frustration, like hours of, oh my God, everything screws up. What do I do? And I start to constrain everything. Just yeah.
Right. So for
Thank you.
example, that's something that happened a lot to me when I was working on design systems. So suppose you have like a huge frame with gazillion stuff in it, and some of them, and you don't even remember by accident which part of them have their constraint not on left and top, which is the
Yeah.
default, but for some reason on right and bottom and left and
Or
right and
God forbid scale.
or God forbid scale. And then, you suddenly, need to enlarge your frame because, you have more components to document, and you do it without the command, and suddenly you take effect on the objects, and because they're components, then it trickles down to all of your designs. So the amount of sheer carnage that can be exerted of this action is insane. So please
Yeah.
remember that command on Mac or control on PC with key just manipulating the width and the height disregards the constraints. So this is one
Fantastic.
small thing. The other thing that I wanted to show you is that other people miss what's going on with auto layout. Okay, so there's a lot of different things we can talk about when we talk about auto layout. I just only want to touch one of the most important ones that I think if you remember that, everything else is going to move easily. So I'll remind people what an auto layout is. So suppose I want to do a button, okay, and I maybe let's just be casual and write button, and then I wrap it in a frame, right? And I enlarge the frame a bit. It doesn't even matter, but you'll see I'm just making it easier for myself. And I will hit auto layout plus yes. Which auto layout? Let's do vertical. And it has padding, and margin is not relevant because there's only one thing inside. Let's see something in terms of the background. And let's have some round corners because why not? So as you can see, I can manipulate the amount of padding I have on the top and the bottom, left and right. Unfortunately, in the meantime, Figma does not allow for freedom and asymmetry in terms of the padding. So you cannot have top padding 0 and bottom padding 15. You'll have to have both of them 15 or both of them 0. Same goes for left and right. This is a very unfortunate fact, and boo Figma. But they already promised. They know that it's a fault. That's something that it was. They just wanted to go with something, and it was easier to do it symmetrically. But one of the few, in the couple of months to the future, they promise they're gonna fix it and make it all 4 of them completely autonomical. So regarding auto layout, so what's the point with auto layout? The point is that now with auto layout, I can do something like this, and the bottom is gonna enlarge and contract as much as I want, right? So this is a great thing. Now, what usually people miss about auto layout is that when you have a situation of frames inside frames inside frames, auto layout almost always makes sense only if everything from the base unit, which has auto layout, wrapping it also has auto layout. Now, why is that true? So suppose I'll have a couple of buttons, some of them short, some of them long, okay? Now, and I want to wrap them all in a frame, right? Let's paint the frame in some color so it's easier to recognize. Now, if the frame itself does not have auto layout, even if the bottom will, it will still not help me. So it doesn't matter if I have clip content, yes or no, but if I want the unit itself to enlarge in its container, the container has to be auto layout as well. And if it doesn't, it wouldn't work. I mean, what do you mean it wouldn't work? It wouldn't work with auto layouting everything, right? So only the button will auto layout, but usually it's not what you want. So usually the logic of auto layouting, if you need to think about it conceptually, abstractly, is that you think about the kernel, right? If you think about the base unit, the atom, right? That you want to have auto layout, and then you start wrapping it with stuff, okay? Wrapping it with I don't know, an auto layout of all the objects, and then an auto layout of all the sections, and then an auto layout of all the page, whatever, right? So this will only make sense. So now if we will make auto layout on it, you can see immediately that it starts respecting the objects inside of it. And if the object grows or shrinks, the frame grows and shrinks. And if I'll have a couple of frames, then it will work the same way, right? So if for some reason auto layout won't seem to achieve a desirable result for you, remember that you might have somewhere in your hierarchy, and this hierarchy can be very, very deep. It can be like, I don't know, 10 levels deep, a frame inside a frame, inside a frame, inside a frame, inside a frame, right? Especially in complex web apps and stuff like that.
Let me ask you that. So for somebody starting up for Figma, how important it is for her to go into auto layouts, like on their first months of usage? What do you think? Like,
I would use the analogy we used with why using a component, because you want to change less things eventually. So I was working with Figma long before auto layout existed, and what I needed to do every time I had a button that had a different label inside of it, and I wanted to keep the same padding, I would need to do the following thing. So let's avoid the auto layout here, and so now we have padding of 20 on the sides, right? So how do I know it? I can alt hover, and I can see the padding, right? But suppose now I want to make the button less, and now what do I do? So now I start shrinking, right? Right. So how do I know how much is 20? I don't. So I kind of visually almost go to 20, and then I go into the label, and then I do the alt thing, and then so it's 22, right? So now I take it, and then I will just subtract 2 from the width. And this is how,
so you actually don't remember. You don't remember your life before auto layout.
Exactly. So the moment auto layout arrived, doing stuff like that, which is a bullshit job, right? So you're not expecting designers to waste their time on manipulating how many pixels, by hand are there between the label and the end of the button background. So.
And remember, it's always easier to take out auto layout than putting it in.
Exactly. So as you just saw, I can just eliminate auto layout, nothing will change. But the moment I make something auto layout, which was not, things will change because of the limitation that Figma puts currently on padding from auto layout, and the fact that everything inside auto layout has to be one-dimensional. So you can't have like a button and then some circle here on the side, right? So if I want something like that, so for example, let's conjure up the notion that I want some bubblycon flashing on my button, right? Because it's a very important button and it's new button and whatever, right? So now I want the same thing here in the auto layout. Look what happens. Nothing happens, okay? Because wait, nothing happens here because this is also not an auto layout, but this is an auto layout, and it's vertical auto layout, right? So Figma will force me, right? It will force me to have them one beneath the other because it's a vertical auto layout, or horizontal if it's a horizontal auto layout. But I couldn't achieve what I need here easily without a layout. So I would need to do some manipulations. I would probably go and do horizontal and then take that to the right. And then I would probably wrap this inside of a frame and just enlarge the amount of vertical space under the circle.
You'd hack that.
I would hack that. So you can hack stuff in Figma, but I would just wish Figma, allow us with tools better than this. But you have what you have and you have to work with it.
Sure. Okay. So moving onward, the last but not least, that's mine, I guess.
Yes.
Right.
So let me get out of the share. Stop sharing. Okay.
Yeah. So. Yep. I share my screen. Yep. So, so many things here. Wow. So the last tip I'm gonna give you people, and we've gone into Erez's rabbit hole, which is so fascinating, and it's like a barrel of so much information. I wish I had when I started. So just, this is a note. So when you go into Figma, one of the things that really changes in your mind and set of mind is the fact that this is a collaborative space. This is not just a leap in UX, because the UI and UX of Figma actually drawn from a lot of previous tools, and they copied a lot, and that's good because it saved a lot of the learning curve to move into Figma. However, the main concept of a collaborative design tool is at the roots of Figma, and you have to A, know it, and B, embrace it, because that's the big leap. Because the modern design is not a single person's work. It's always collaborative work, talking about the problems you're solving. So just so you have, on one end, you have the comments, which is one way you can collaborate and put comments on design and share your ideas, which is okay. We've seen that, but much more important than that is the collaborative, the fact that we're both together here, and I can see what Erez is looking at, okay? And that's a big thing for me, because I can follow Erez, understand what they're doing, and actually I can work together with them, and we can work together. And that's something that I think is the most important thing to understand about Figma. It's going to change the way your design team work and you think about design. We've took design to our customers. We opened them. It was difficult emotionally, but it was something that was very powerful for us to enable them that kind of access, enabling them to play a little with the words. And you need to take this with a grain of salt, because somebody going on in this file and doesn't know what she's doing or he's doing, that can be a mess. You can use the history, you can go back, but that can be a mess. Still, the benefits of working together on something is so enormous. It's so great. Now that's my last tip. Just work on it. Put people together. Mind. We started with the pricing and mind the charges applied for that, but usually it's worthwhile. I think we're done for today.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think we just exhibited your last point by working on the same canvas, all showing his respective points. So here's one example of collaboration live ingrained. I would also say that collaboration can come at levels. So you can collaborate on a very light level with stakeholders that the only thing you want for them to do is see your shared prototype. So you won't even share with them the file itself. You only share the prototype and they can comment on it. Okay, and if you allow comments, they can comment on it. And that's also, it's already a level of cooperation. then you can
Yeah.
make it higher a notch, and you can share as a viewer with your developers, and your developers can view and comment and inspect whatever they need to inspect. So that's also a level of collaboration.
And one neat thing about it, I think it's unique for Figma. So if you share a prototype with your client and you're working on that prototype, it real-time updates your
Yep.
design. So you can talk and they say, oh, that text is wrong, and you change it. And it's kind of a magical thing. It's a powerful moment when you're like, I'm saying that, and you see your design, and that you don't have to let them like move stuff, but you can show them how things are designed in real time. And
Right.
that's fantastic.
Right, because one of the powers of Figma is the fact that it's web-based and it's live and it's online.
Right.
So nothing is
Right.
shared, copied, distributed. Nothing is immutable, right? Everything is mutable. You change something, it changes in all the places, for good
Okay.
and for bad.
So okay, Erez. So how can we find you on the web? How can people
Well,
reach you?
right. So if you're in Israel, you probably already know me, especially if you're interested in Figma. But I mean, by the way, we encourage people from abroad to also go to Figma Israel and post things in English. We'll answer in English with great care and pleasure. But apart from that, I don't know. Come to my courses in HIT Institute or other places where I teach, and
Yeah.
yeah, that's basically it.
So so thank you. Thanks so much for coming in and sharing. So your knowledge is so vast and you explain so clearly. So I've learned so much today. Even sometimes you know something and
Right,
somebody explain it to you and you see it clearly. It just
right,
organizes your mind. Like that works.
right.
So thank you so much, and I hope to see you around again as much as we can.
We will collaborate.
Yeah, we are. Bye, man.
Take care.